This happened about 6 years ago, back when I was 24 and living alone for the first time in my life. Not alone in a romantic, independent adult kind of way. Alone in the broke, figuring it out, eating cereal for dinner kind of way. I had just dropped out of my second year of community college. Not dramatically, not because something terrible happened, just because I ran out of money and motivation at roughly the same time, which, if you've ever been there, you know is a particular kind of quiet defeat. I moved into a small rental house on the edge of a town called Crestwood in rural western Pennsylvania. Population just under 3,000. The kind of town where the gas station closes at 9 and the library is only open 4 days a week. I still think about what happened in that house. Not every day anymore, but enough. Enough that I can't hear static without my chest doing something uncomfortable. Enough that I still don't own a radio. And I want to be clear before I start, I am not someone who believes in the paranormal. I wasn't then, and I'm mostly not now. What I believe in is that something's happened that you can't fully explain, and the not explaining is the part that stays with you. The house was a rental, one of those old 2-story wood frame places that had probably been built sometime in the 1940s and renovated in the 1970s, and then largely left alone since then. The landlord was a guy named Dwight who lived 40 minutes away and communicated almost entirely through text messages with poor punctuation. The rent was $480 a month, which, on my part-time warehouse wages, was about all I could manage if I also wanted to eat and keep the lights on. Crestwood itself sits right at the base of the Allegheny Plateau, which means the town is essentially wrapped on 3 sides by a dense second-growth forest, mostly oak and black cherry, and these tall, pale birch trees that look kind of wrong at night, like they're too thin to be real. My house was on Dennison Road, which was technically within town limits, but the nearest neighbor was about a quarter mile down the road, and behind my backyard there was nothing but tree line for miles. I mean that literally. You walked past my back fence and there were no trails, no hunting cabins, nothing marked on any map I ever found. Just trees and slope and whatever lived in there. It was late October when things started. The weather had already turned, that hard, gray Pennsylvania cold that settles in before Halloween and doesn't leave until April. The kind of cold that comes with wind off the plateau, low and steady, pushing dead leaves against the side of the house all night. I'd been in the rental since August, so I'd had 2 months to get used to the sounds of the place. Old houses have sounds. The heat clicking on, the pipes contracting, floorboards that creak in certain spots when the temperature drops. I knew all of those sounds. I had cataloged them the way you do when you're living alone and slightly anxious, and you want to be able to reassure yourself at 2 a.m. that what you're hearing is normal. I didn't have much furniture. A mattress on the floor upstairs. A folding table in the kitchen. A second-hand couch I'd gotten from a Facebook marketplace, listing for $30. And in the corner of the living room, there was a radio, a vintage AM/FM tabletop model, dark brown plastic, the kind with a circular dial and a red indicator needle that swept across the frequency band. It had been left behind by the previous tenant. Dwight said I could keep it or throw it out. He didn't care. I kept it mostly because I didn't have a TV and the silence of that house got heavy in the evenings. I'd tune it to a classic rock station out of Pittsburgh and let it run while I made dinner. It worked fine. A little scratchy at the high end of the dial, but fine. I want you to hold that image for a second. A 24-year-old sitting alone in an almost empty house at the edge of the woods, in a town he barely knows, in late October, with a used radio in the corner. I'm not telling you this to be cinematic. I'm telling you because context matters. Because the person I was then, isolated, slightly depressed, working a job I didn't care about, with no real social life in that town, that person was already primed for things to feel strange. I've thought about that a lot since. How much of what happened was the situation, and how much was me? I still don't have a clean answer to that. The first time it happened, I almost didn't notice. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had worked the next morning at 6, and I'd gone to bed early, maybe 10:30, and I woke up because I heard the radio, which shouldn't have been on, because I always turn it off before bed. I was particular about that, not obsessive. Just, I didn't like falling asleep to sound. So I laid there in the dark for a moment, listening, and there it was, faint, coming from downstairs. A soft crackling sound, like static, with something underneath it. Not music, not a voice exactly, just something textured moving inside the white noise. My first thought was that I hadn't turned it off all the way. The power dial on that radio had a dead zone, a spot where it felt like it was off but wasn't quite. I'd hit that zone before and left the thing running without realizing it. So I checked my phone. It was 3:04 in the morning. I lay there another minute, annoyed, then got up and went downstairs. The radio was on, indicator needle, sitting somewhere in the lower AM band, which I never tuned to. The sound coming out of it was static, layered, uneven static. And beneath it there was something that might have been a tone, or might have been interference from a distant station, or might have been the wind vibrating something outside in a way that the old radio speaker was picking up and distorting. I stood in front of it for a moment. It was cold in the living room. The wind was going hard outside, pushing at the window frames, and I could hear the oak tree in the backyard moving, that low, wooden groan that big trees make when the wind catches them right. I turned the radio off, checked the dial position, went back to bed, told myself I hadn't clicked it all the way. Sleep came slow, but it came. The second time was Thursday. Same time, 3:02, according to my phone. Same static from downstairs. Same low, textured something underneath it. This time I stood at the top of the stairs for a while before going down, because something about the sound was making me reluctant to move toward it, which I immediately recognized as irrational. It's a radio, I told myself. You're tired, and it's 3 a.m, and your brain is making nothing into something. I went downstairs, turned it off. This time I pulled the plug from the wall. I stood there a moment in the sudden quiet and listened. Wind, the oak tree, the distant sound of a truck on the highway, maybe 2 miles away. Normal, all normal. It was probably a short in the wiring, I thought. Old radios do that. They lose contact in the off switch and power back up. I pulled the plug, so that was handled. Done. Except the next night, Friday. So 3 nights in a row, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of static. And the radio's plug was still on the floor where I'd left it, a foot away from the wall socket. Not plugged in. The radio physically could not have been on. I stood in my bedroom doorway for a long time. The sound was there. It was definitely there. I wasn't dreaming. I pinched my arm, which is a stupid thing to do, but I did it anyway, and I was awake. The static was coming from downstairs. It was quieter than before. More like something you'd hear if you press your ear against a closed door. Intimate, like it was trying not to be heard. I told myself it was something else. I told myself it was a sound from outside, a piece of loose sheet metal on the fence post vibrating in the wind, or a neighbor's radio drifting through the cold air, or the furnace doing something in the ductwork that I'd never noticed before. The furnace. That was probably it. Old house, old ducts, weird resonance. It's the furnace. It sounds like static because ducts distort things. That explanation almost worked. Almost. Except when I finally went downstairs and stood in the living room. The sound wasn't coming from vents. It was coming from the radio. From the Unplugged radio, sitting dark and silent on its shelf, with the cord still on the floor. I picked up the radio, turned it over in my hands. It was off. The dial was in the off position. The cord was not connected to anything. And yet when I held it at a certain angle, I could hear something faint right at the edge of perception, like a signal coming from inside the casing, not from the speaker. from inside the body of a unit, a thin, high-frequency whisper of static. I set it down on the floor with more force than I meant to. The sound stopped. I stood there in my living room at 3 a.m, in an almost empty house, in the dark, with the wind pressing against the windows and the oak tree moving outside, and I thought, something is wrong here, and I don't know what it is. I didn't throw the radio out. I know, looking back, that seems obvious. Get rid of the thing. Problem solved. But I want you to understand that in the daylight, with the radio sitting inert on the shelf and the sun coming to the windows and the birds doing whatever birds do in the oak tree in the afternoon, in the daylight, it seemed crazy. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd embarrass yourself by taking seriously. So I left it there, but I moved it to the kitchen, away from my line of sight from the couch. And I started keeping a note on my phone, just the time I woke up each night, and whether I heard anything, because I'm that kind of person. I wanted data. I wanted to be logical about it. Every night that week, 3 to 3:06 a.m. Static, then nothing. By the fourth night, I'd stop going downstairs. I would just lie there and listen to it end. It always ended within a few minutes. It always went away clean, like a switch being flipped. And then the house would be quiet, and I would lie there in the dark and wait for my heart rate to settle, and eventually sleep would find me again. On the 8th night, something else happened. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the static, which had become almost routine by then. But this time there was something else underneath it. Not a tone, not interference. A voice. I'm not going to oversell this. It wasn't clear. It wasn't someone saying words in a language I could understand. It was more like the shape of voice, the rhythm and cadence of speech without any of the actual content. Like hearing someone talk through 3 walls and a closed door. The pattern of it was there. The intention of it was there. But the meaning was completely absent. I sat up in bed. My mouth was dry. I sat there for probably 2 full minutes, completely still, listening to this rhythm coming up from the kitchen. And then it stopped, just like always. Clean, immediate stop. I did not go downstairs that night. In the morning, I moved the radio to the garage. I put it on the concrete floor next to the hot water heater, and I closed the door. There was no reason a sound from the garage should reach me in my second-floor bedroom. The house's insulation was bad, but not that bad. That night, I woke up at 3:02 a.m. The static was there. It was quieter. Definitely quieter, but it was there, and when I held my breath and pushed myself to focus on what was underneath it, the voice shape was there too. Still no words. Just pattern. Just rhythm. I lay there with the blanket pulled up, and I thought about the garage door. I thought about whether I'd left it unlocked. It occurred to me, for the first time, that maybe the radio wasn't the source. Maybe the radio was just picking something up, the way a filling in your tooth can supposedly pick up radio signals, the way certain metals resonate at certain frequencies. Maybe there was something transmitting, something out there in the trees or under the ground, or from somewhere along that dead stretch of Dennison Road. Something on a frequency that this old radio was somehow tuned to receive, even unplugged, even powered off. Old radios had capacitors that hold charge for hours. I'd read that once. Something about residual capacitance. I told myself that. I really tried to make it work. But then, 3 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. and the static was in my bedroom. Not loud, not from a speaker or a visible source. Just present. The way tinnitus is present, like something vibrating inside the room itself. I turned on my lamp, looked at every corner. Nothing. No radio. No device. I'd taken my phone off its charger and put it in the hallway before bed because I'd read that phones can sometimes emit low-frequency interference when charging. The room was empty. Just me and the mattress and the window and the sound. I looked at the window. The oak tree was still. No wind that night. The branches weren't moving. But outside, beyond the yard, past the back fence, the tree line was dark the way tree lines are dark at night. That complete, total darkness where the trees are thick enough that no ambient light gets in. I stared at the tree line for a long time. I could hear the static. I could hear the voice shape underneath it, clearer than it had ever been, and I still couldn't make out words, but I had the sudden, very strong impression that whatever was speaking, or whatever I was interpreting as speaking, was not far away. I pulled the curtain closed, sat on the edge of my mattress, did not sleep again that night. 2 nights after that, I woke up and the room smelled like burning. Not smoke, not with smoke or electrical smoke, something chemical, like a soldering iron or a circuit board overheating, metallic and hot. I was out of bed before I was fully conscious. The smell was strong. The static was there, louder than it had ever been, and underneath it the voice was louder too. And for 1 second, 1 fraction of a second, it sounded like it was right next to me, like something standing at the foot of my mattress with its mouth open, making a sound that almost had shape. Then the smoke alarm in the hallway went off. I moved. I don't remember deciding to move. The hallway was dark, and I hit the door frame with my shoulder, and then I was at the top of the stairs, and the smell was stronger, and there was a light, orange flickering, coming from the kitchen doorway at the bottom of the stairs. Fire. Something in the kitchen was burning. Not the whole room. Not yet, but enough. A stack of mail on the folding table. A dish towel near the stove. I could see the edge of the flame from the top of the stairs. Small but moving. Spreading. I don't know how it started. I don't know, and I never found out. The stove had not been on. I knew for certain the stove had not been on. I came down the stairs. I grabbed the dish towel. Wrong. I know that was wrong. And threw it in the sink and turned the faucet on. I smothered the mail with a pot lid I grabbed off the counter. It took maybe 45 seconds. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the pot lid twice. When it was out, I stood in the kitchen in the dark with the smoke alarm still screaming and my own breathing loud in my ears, and I looked down at the floor. The radio was on the floor. It had been in the garage. I had put it in the garage. It was on the floor of my kitchen, 4 feet from the stove, and the indicator needle was moving slowly, steadily, sweeping back and forth across the dial, not tuned to anything, just sweeping back and forth. The smoke alarm ran out of whatever it needed and went quiet. The static from the radio was gone. The voice shape was gone. It was just me and the smell of smoke and that needle moving. I left. I didn't pack. I grabbed my keys and my phone off the hallway floor, and I left the front door open, and I got in my car and I drove. I drove for maybe 20 minutes without any particular direction, just away from Dennison Road, just away from the tree line and the dark and that sweeping needle. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop on Route 66, about 15 miles east of Crestwood. I sat in my car with the engine running and the heater on and the radio. I almost laugh now. The radio off. Definitely off. I had checked the dial. I had checked twice. I sat there until it was light. I called Dwight the next morning and told him I was leaving. I told him there had been a small fire. I told him I'd pay the rest of the month, but I needed to go. He wasn't happy, but he didn't fight me on it. I went back in daylight with a friend I'd called from the truck stop, someone I knew from the warehouse who agreed to come without too many questions. We took my mattress and my clothes and the folding table. I left the couch. I left everything in the kitchen. I left the radio on the kitchen floor exactly where it had been. I did not look at the radio when I walked past it. My friend asked me what happened. I said there had been a small electrical fire, and the place gave me a bad feeling. He nodded and helped me carry the mattress and didn't push. Good man. I looked back at the house when we drove away. Just once. The windows were dark. The oak tree was still. The tree line behind the backyard was just trees. Ordinary, daylight trees with the last of the October leaves. Nothing unusual, nothing visible. But I noticed as we turned out of Dennison Road onto the main road that the time on my car's dashboard was 3 a.m., which made no sense because it was clearly 9 in the morning, full daylight, and my phone said 9:12 a.m. The car clock had never been wrong before. I watched it for a second. It didn't change. It just sat there reading 3 o'clock. Then we turned a corner and I stopped looking at it, and I didn't think about it again until about 6 months later, lying awake at 2 in the morning in a new apartment in a different city, and the memory of it surfaced out of nowhere and sat on my chest until dawn. I've tried to explain it. To myself, mostly. I'm not the type to post on forums or join online communities about this kind of thing, but I did spend a while reading about it. Residual capacitance in old radio units. Infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can cause feelings of unease, hallucinations, a sense of presence. There are documented cases of infrasound from industrial sources, from wind over specific terrain, from geological events. Rural western Pennsylvania has a history of old mine shafts and geological instability. I read about that too. The fire could have been, probably was, a wiring issue in an old house that had never been properly maintained. Old houses catch fire from bad wiring all the time. Those explanations cover most of it. They cover the surface. They don't cover the voice shape. They don't cover the radio being in the kitchen when I had left it in the garage. They don't cover the clock. I've mostly made my peace with not having answers. I think that's the adult thing to do. Some events are just events, things that happen and leave a residue that doesn't wash out clean. I've moved 3 times since then. I always check the nearest tree line before signing a lease. I've never owned a radio since. I keep my phone charged in the hallway. I still wake up sometimes between 3 and 4 in the morning. Not every night, but enough. I'll lie there in the dark and listen to the silence of wherever I'm living now, cataloging the sound the way I did back then. The heat clicking on, the pipes, the floorboards, learning the building, telling myself it's normal. And sometimes, in that half place between awake and asleep, I think I can hear it, just at the edge, just beneath everything else. Static, and underneath the static, patient and shapeless and very nearly comprehensible, something that moves like a voice. I never listen long enough to hear what it's trying to say. I don't think I want to know. I think some signals aren't meant to be received. I think some frequencies are wrong in a way that doesn't have a word yet. And I think whatever was broadcasting from somewhere behind that tree line on Dennison Road, whatever was transmitting at 3 a.m. into an unplugged radio in a cold house at the edge of the Allegheny Plateau, I think it's still there, still going, still sweeping that needle back and forth across the dial, waiting for someone else to tune in.